Sam Coleman, thank you for being the very first guest I'm going to interview on my Substack.
Thanks for having me, Philip. It's a pleasure and an honour to be the first.
Well, thanks for joining me. So, a couple of reasons I was wanting to have a chat with you in this way. Firstly, you've got a very cool view. It's an interesting and important rival to panpsychism. It's closely related in certain ways to panpsychism, although crucially different in some ways. And it's perhaps a view that's not as known as it should be in the public sphere among people outside of academia who are interested in the philosophy of consciousness. So that's one reason. But also, secondly, I've been thinking a lot recently about what I'm calling unconscious consciousness. The issue being, can you have a feeling you're not aware of? Sounds kind of contradictory, but in other ways, it can kind of seem to make sense. So I wrote a Substack post on that a couple of weeks ago, and people can go back and read that if they want. But the more every time I'm thinking about this and writing about this, I keep coming back actually to your view and thinking it's really something that needs to be connected in this context. Okay, so I thought maybe we could take both of these in turn. All right, so starting with your view, which is standardly known, I don't know if you're happy with this name, as panqualityism,
Yeah, happy with
as
that
opposed
name.
to panpsychism.
Yep, happy with that
You want
name.
to tell us a little bit about panqualityism?
Yeah, I mean, you've titled the episode A New Rival to Panpsychism, but I would take issue with that because the view's actually quite old. Um, I mean, you tend to want to include everyone in your view, but I mean, I was just reading about Ernst Mach, who was writing in the late 19th century. Pretty sure he's a panqualityist. Pretty sure William James is a panqualityist, at least at some times. Pretty sure Bertrand Russell is. I'd want to claim maybe Leibniz, maybe Plato, who talks about in the Timaeus atoms having qualities like brightness. So yeah, anyway, I wouldn't want the impression to be given that I have anything new to offer. This is just an old view. But yeah, I mean so I don't know if people know what qualia are. If panpsychism says that qualia are everywhere in a way because consciousness is everywhere, panqualityism kind of agrees with that. Only it doesn't think that qualia have to be conscious. So it doesn't think that the qualities we're aware of, qualia, have got to be experienced by us or have got to be part of our awareness or have got to be objects of awareness for them to exist. And this strain, I mean, so people think, okay, the idea of a pain that you don't feel, a pain that you're unaware of is kind of strange at first view, but can talk about that a bit later. But I think the idea of color qualities, color qualia that are outside of awareness is not that strange. It's kind of common sense, actually. If I see a tree with green leaves, there's a kind of direct realism about perception that would say, when I'm visually aware of greenness in that experience, the greenness is the greenness of the leaves. That if the green quale is anywhere, it's on the leaves, right? They contribute the greenness to my experience somehow reaches out and wraps around the tree, and it's part of my mental state in a way. But now, if I close my eyes, does the leaf stop being green? Does the tree stop being green on the face? Intuitively, commonsensically, no. The greenness persists. It's the same greenness that's there whether I have my eyes closed or not. It doesn't depend on my experience. It's not like Berkeley's view where you need God in the quad, right, to keep perceiving everything for it to exist. So I think if the greenness is the quale, when I'm aware of it, now I close my eyes, the greenness is still there. On the face of it, the quale is still there, the green quale. So it exists outside my experience of it. It's there waiting for me to become aware of it or not. So that's the idea of an unexperienced sensory quality or a quale. Of course, I think qualia are in the head, so I'm not a naive realist about perception, but that's kind of a tangential issue. So yeah, that's how I would make sense of the idea of unexperienced qualities on the face of it at a first pass. And whereas
I think
yeah, sorry,
that's really clear.
yeah. So the panpsychist says qualities that have consciousness bundled up in them are everywhere, and the panqualityist says qualities are everywhere, but consciousness, our awareness, is something that only happens maybe if you have the special equipment of a brain.
Yeah, that's very clear and nice examples. So yeah, on your first point, you're completely right. I mean, I guess what I was thinking was just a little bit of clickbait more than
No, it's
anything.
fine.
Of, people might be maybe more familiar with panpsychism
Yeah,
and there's this new rival, but you're completely right. It's kind of bollocks that it is. I mean, a lot of people think it's uh, Bertrand Russell's view. At least, I mean, Russell changes mind all the time, and panpsychists sort of draw their inspiration from certain period of Russell in the 1920s, but actually, arguably, his view was closer to panqualityism. So I'm interested. I mean, I don't know whether we want to go down the rabbit hole of Plato and other historical figures having this view. That would be an interesting thing to convey if we can get to it. But yeah, bang to rights, as they say. You're completely right on that. Okay, so i- is it does it help to think of it this way? Is it maybe we can divide two aspects of consciousness, qualities, sort of colors, sounds, smells, tastes, on the one hand, um, and on the other hand, subjectivity, the fact that those qualities are experienced. Um, and at least at the conceptual level, it seems we can distinguish those two things. And so, what the panpsychist is saying, they're both everywhere at the fundamental level. Subjective qualities, so the two together, experienced qualities of some kind, presumably quite simple, are sort of everywhere. But the panqualityist divides up those two things and says, no, the qualities are everywhere, but it's only in kind of brains that they are experienced qualities. Um, is that the right way to think of it? And if so, why do you think that is advantageous over panpsychism? Why is it better to divide things up in that way?
good. Yeah, so that's very helpful, that distinction between qualities and awareness or subjectivity. So you could think of qualities as think of qualities as what makes experiences different and what makes them resemble. So tasting coffee is different from tasting lemon, is different from tasting chocolate. Seeing blue is different from seeing red, from seeing purple, from seeing green, but maybe seeing blue and seeing green resemble each other more than seeing red. Well, it's the qualitative aspects that you're comparing there. So qualities are what make experiences different and comparable and resemble more or less. And awareness or subjectivity is what they've all got in common, or consciousness. So all of those are experiences in the same
Right.
way. They are like something for me in the Thomas Nagel's sense. So there's that way of locking onto them. And then we've got a good question. We can distinguish those aspects conceptually. Are they separable in reality? I take it the panpsychist and a lot of people in a broadly Cartesian uh, historical trend would say no. In fact, qualia are just modes or modifications of kinds of consciousness. And the panquality says, no, no, the qualities are one thing and the consciousness is another thing. So why is that a better view? Well, I mean, you may have independent reasons for thinking that there can be unconscious qualia. I happen to. So, I mean, for example, if your colleague, or it might be yourself, is behaving in a tetchy way, or your partner, and you say, you kind of seem snappy today, you seem kind of angry, and they say, no, I'm not, I'm really not. Of course, they snap at you when they say that. It may turn out that they are angry and that on some level they have anger feelings or anger qualia that they're unaware of, and those are causing the behavior. There's reason to ascribe anger to them, and if anger is the thing that if I were consciously angry, it would make sense why I was behaving like that if I'm the tetchy person. So it makes sense to ascribe the same thing to them, only outside of their awareness, with the same causal profile, if you like, the same upshots on their behavior. So there's a kind of reason outside of the debate about consciousness to do it, but also so within that debate, I think panpsychism faces the famous combination problem, or the subject version of that, which is if quarks, if the quarks and electrons are the smallest bits of matter we know, and you think that your mind is built up out of a population of those little guys, each having their own experiences. It's like a combination of little individual people, or at least subjects. Well, how does that form into unified consciousness that Philip Goff has, one singular point of view on the world, instead of just making a crowd? And Lucretius, William James is often quoted in this context, but Lucretius said this a long time ago. He has, his poem on the nature of things, 100 BC. If the paraphrase, but if the atoms were conscious, their unions and combinations would no more make a unity than a crowd of cattle. So panqualityism, since it doesn't say that the basic bits of matter are little subjects of experience, that all they are is qualitied items. Maybe electrons are green, protons are red, but without any awareness or feeling there. All it has to combine are the qualities, like little paint patches, to make a canvas. It doesn't have to combine individual perspectives or minds, which looks harder. So there's
Right.
some direct panpsychism versus
Brilliant.
panqualityism motivation.
Okay, I'd like to talk about both of these. So I guess the first
Yeah.
issue connects very much to my Substack post a couple of weeks ago. And then the thought I was entertaining there is that you can have experiences or feelings that you are experiencing, but you're not aware of that you're experiencing them. Um, and the examples I gave were, it sounds weird at first. How can you, if you're not aware of it, then you're not feeling it. But then certain cases might make you think again. The feeling of the clothes on your body. Now I've raised that, you draw your attention to it, and but were you experiencing it before I drew your attention to it? Or the other example of driving on a road you're very familiar. I can't drive, actually, shamefully. I still can't drive. But anyway, people have told me about it. It's sad, isn't it? And you're driving for miles, and you're very familiar with it, and your mind's on something else. Were you experiencing the road? It doesn't see it. It seems like on one side you can say, well, you were experiencing it because you would have crashed. On the other hand, your mind was on something else. You weren't sort of aware of what you experienced. You maybe can't remember it. And then you give a nice example there of anger. I think I was guilty of this shamefully myself this week with my partner, actually saying, I'm not angry,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Okay, well, let's just think about your example. I mean, so you want to say that you have the anger qualia, but you don't experience them. I'm inclined to say, I'm very uncertain about all of this,
Oh,
but I'm inclined to say, no, you experience the anger, you feel it, but you're not aware that you're feeling it at a cognitive, reflective level.
yeah.
So what's wrong with that alternative explanation?
I mean, it could be both. I don't want to say the thing you're talking about never happens. So what you're talking about, I wouldn't call that a lack of awareness, because for me, awareness connotes consciousness. If I'm really unaware of anger, I don't think that it's part of what it's like to be me. I think if it's part of my stream of consciousness, which is what you're saying, then I am feeling it and I am aware of it in that sense, albeit maybe peripherally. So I think what you're talking about sounds more like a lack of attention or a lack of cognitive access. Like my attention is on my daydream when I'm driving, or my attention is on my work when I'm this angry colleague or whoever it is, and not on the feeling. But the feeling is there. It's part of my what it is like. It's not getting the cognitive resources it might do. It's not a question of consciousness. My view is a it could be a rival to that in certain circumstances, but it's that the quality of the anger is there, but it's literally unfelt. So it's not part of what it's like to be you at all, and it's not part of your stream of consciousness. It's there, subterraneanly, if you like, under the water, but it's still having behavioral effects on you. So, I mean, another example might be, so I mentioned earlier, like, people find the idea of unfelt pain quite strange, but if you think about getting injured during a match, like some kind of sport. Like, I would get my foot trodden on in football all the time, or my hand or something, studs. It really hurt. I got scars from that. But your focus is on the match. You keep playing. The pain sort of fades to the periphery. It may even go completely unfelt for a while. You may still limp. You may still act in a pained way. If we were to measure your physiological responses, they may show pain, like somebody under general anesthetic. That's another example we could come to, actually. Ned Block's got a kind of terrifying analysis of what happens under general. Um, so I would say, put it this way, if to come back to the anger case, if the disavowals of your colleague is sincere and they cast around, they really can't feel any anger, nonetheless, it makes sense to ascribe anger qualia to them because that's how they're behaving. Well, if they're not feeling them, but it makes sense to ascribe them, it follows that the qualia are unconscious. And I've argued in a recent paper that unless we say things like that, you're actually going to find that your conscious feelings of anger and pain, whatever, turn out to be epiphenomenal, as in causally inefficacious, completely redundant with respect to the physical world, which would be a
Mm,
bad result. So I think we've got a dilemma actually between positing unconscious qualia and saying that conscious ones are epiphenomenal. And we should go for saying that they're unconscious.
very interesting.
Yeah. I can explain that if you
So
want.
I certainly feel the intuition you're getting at, that, how can you be feeling it if you're not aware of it? If it's part of your stream of consciousness, surely you've got to be aware of it in some sense. I feel the intuition. On the other hand, I also feel the intuition against your view, probably maybe a little bit more. Like, how can you have um the quality of pain without feeling it? I don't know, that they seem to intrinsically go together. So I'd like to ask you to try and help the audience kind of make intuitive sense of that.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. I've also just also been thinking of a way of maybe diagnosing the intuition against the view I'm more attracted to. So as I say, the view I'm more attracted to in your anger case is that you feel the anger, but you're completely unaware of it. And the way I was trying to make sense of that, or in the football case, you feel the pain, but you're not aware of the feeling. Is maybe it's because every time we reflectively attend to our feelings, we are aware of them. And so when we conceptualize them, when we reflect on them, we're aware of them. And so it's a bit like the refrigerator light, it's always on when you open the door. So then it makes it really hard to conceive of feelings you're not aware of, because every time you think about them, you're aware of them. So maybe that's one way of diagnosing the strangeness of the view I'm more attracted to. Anyway, so yeah, there's those 2 points there. Persuade us that you can have pain that you don't feel,
Yeah.
and then maybe can I explain away the weirdness of my view? So your view's still weird. I can explain away the weirdness of mine.
Well,
I'm very uncertain. Again, I'm very uncertain about all of this, but that's what
yeah.
2 points to put to you.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to come across like I'm completely certain either. I mean, I'm pretty confident about this. And I also take some support from common sense, weirdly enough. I think it's philosophers that find it very
Hmm,
hard to imagine unfelt, unconscious
really?
qualia. If you look online for unfelt pains, you'll find a lot of people saying that they get woken up in the night by headaches, for example. So if I'm brought to consciousness by a
Right.
headache, the headache has to cause me to come to consciousness, and it has to precede the consciousness because that's how causation works. Cause precedes effect. In that case, what these people are saying is I had a pain before I was aware of it, or before I felt it. The pain caused me to come to consciousness, which makes
Right.
sense. It may summon attentional mechanisms in the brain, bring you to arouse you, bring you to awake, and then you feel the pain. But it was to cause the awakening. It had to be there beforehand. It seems to me, unless you're constantly dreaming, you're constantly awake, constantly conscious, like Descartes says. I mean, as for your view, I mean, I think I can motivate my view by criticizing yours. Um, um, so David Rosenthal has this nice argument against the kind of thing you're talking about. He targets it to Ned Block, who posits a similar kind of thing. So what's the case? I've got an anger, let's take the anger. So according to you, I've got an anger feeling that I'm unaware of. So it's not in. I can't report on it. If you ask me if I'm angry, I say no. I can't conceptualize it. I can't act on it. Like I can't seek therapy or take, I don't know, go for a run or take a chill pill, listen to some music to get rid of it. I'm cognitively oblivious to it by hypothesis because you say I'm unaware of it. So it seems to me if you took the
Right.
feeling away, put it back, it would make no difference to my conscious psychological life. It would make no difference to my reports. But then you say, but you are still feeling it. Well, it seems to me that if it doesn't register with me at all and I'm unaware of it, it's hard to say that it really is part of what I'm feeling, what it's like to be me. The idea of such a cognitively isolated feeling is hard to make sense of. So that's not that's not the kind of objection you were
Mm,
talking about. It's not an intuition objection. This is an objection of principle, I think.
right.
So
I see.
I would
I
say
see.
that
I see.
if you really think that it's outside of awareness, it's cognitively isolated in that way. The best thing to say is that it's actually unconscious, phenomenally unconscious. You're not feeling it. And that would be to take you to my view, just that extra little step from saying that it's felt but outside awareness to saying, no, no, outside awareness means strictly you're not feeling it. But as I say, these are rivals in some situations, but there's no reason why the kind of thing you're talking about couldn't also happen sometimes. So I don't want to, well, that is to say, a feeling could be on the periphery of attention. I don't think it could be unfelt altogether. I think that's kind of that really is an oxymoron, I think. So anyway, there's my pitch.
Yeah, okay, that's very interesting. And so would you say the same about so we've been talking, I guess, about experiences that you're allegedly completely unaware of or that are completely unfelt. But what about sort of middle way cases? So I'm thinking about what Ned Block calls the overflow thesis, that our experiences might be richer than what we have cognitive access to. So a nice way into this is um what's the person's name? The Sperling experiments
Yeah.
from the 60s where they showed subjects like a stack of letters, like 3 across and 5 down or something, and then asked them immediately after, how many lines do you remember? Tell me what lines you remember. And they remember very few of the letters. I can't remember the details now. You probably know better than I do. But they want to say, well, I saw all the letters. I saw all the letters. Um, I just can't tell you what they all are. And cases of change blindness seem to give strong evidence that we are not cognitively aware of. We're not able to cognitively access much of the detail of our experience, and yet it feels like our experience is very rich. If I look around me now, I seem to have this very rich, detailed experience of the room around me, even though we know empirically that much of that detail is not accessible to me. So this leads people like Alva Noe, for example, to say, actually, we are only conscious of a few things at a time. So this idea that I have this rich experience is some kind of illusion. So what do you say about these cases, which are sort of hybrid, I suppose,
Yeah.
of it's an experience, but there's a case that we're not aware of all the details? Or how does that
Yeah.
fit into your view?
Yeah, good. I think there's quite a lot of wiggle room with the overflow cases. So, I mean, right now I'm looking at the screen and you, and I have I may have the impression that the visual field around where I'm focusing is very rich and detailed. But if I pay attention to it actually without moving my eyes, I can see that what's on the table around the laptop is quite blurry, and I wouldn't really be able to tell you much about it. However, I would say, yeah, I see the whole table. And as it happens, I know because I remember. So I put my cup here, I know that I put it there. So I could certainly tell you, yeah, I have a gist, I have a conscious gist of the whole table, but I can't say much about it. But that gist is in cognitive access. I can say, yeah, there's blurry bits here, there, and everywhere, and I have some memory sense of what's there. And I think that's what's going on in the Sperling case. So people say I saw all the letters, but that doesn't mean they saw them all in full detail. And they can report one row. They're looking at a 3 by 3 grid of letters. And the cool thing about it is they'll say they saw all the letters, then you can queue them for one row. So you say, tell us what the middle row was. I do this with my students. It's really fun. They can tell you any row, but only one. After that, they can't tell you the other rows
Right.
generally. So what it's weird because it looks like they have access to all the rows, or they have some grasp of all the rows, yet once they've told you one of them, the other ones disappear. So that's the idea of there being a cognitive bottleneck on experience. They experience the whole lot, but somehow cognition or cognitive reporting mechanisms can only get as far as any one row, and then they die off. They can't give you the rest. But there are alternative explanations. So maybe they get a blurry gist of the whole thing, or enough to tell you that it's letters. Maybe they get an unconscious, very detailed representation of the grid. And then when you
Right.
cue them, what you're doing is activating the relevant part of the unconscious representation. And that's the kind of thing I would say. So I don't think that those kinds of experimental cases, or the distracted driver case you gave, these cases are all going to be interpretable in different ways. And depending what your theory
Yeah.
is, you're going to be able to say something sensible about them. which is why the argument about overflow has been going on since at least 1995, right? When Ned Block first published his influential on a confusion about the function of consciousness.
Right.
And he's had opponents. There have been lots of experiments done since then, and he likes to publish papers where he very ingeniously marshals those experiments to the cause of overflow, but it makes no headway with the opponents at all because they're always able to absorb them, change blindness, whatever it be, into their theory. So he says in change blindness,
Yeah.
you're conscious of the change, but you don't cognize it. The opponent says, I unconsciously visually register it because there are unconscious visual states. And then, once it triggers cognition, I become aware of it. So we can always paraphrase. I think my argument that unless we posit unconscious qualia, conscious qualia are going to be epiphenomenal kind of cuts through that debate. So that may be useful. May prove useful if people
Yeah.
read it. But yeah, these are fascinating cases. Another case is the supposedly unconscious dorsal visual stream. It's supposed to be the zombie stream, and but
Right. Oh yeah, yeah.
Wayne
Oh
Wu
yeah,
is
you recommended a
yeah.
paper to read, which I read this. Go on, tell us the paper. I read it earlier this week on your recommendation. Go for it.
I forget the title, but it's a Wayne Wu paper in the Journal of Philosophy from 2020 or
Yep.
so. He argues the dorsal stream may be a case of overflowing consciousness. So instead of a merely computational kind of robot system, which is what most people think it is, as compared to the ventral stream, which is giving you this lovely, conscious, colorful, object-filled, rich view of the scene that you're looking at. Instead of there being that big difference between the two streams, the dorsal stream might be inaccessible consciousness. But do you know what Bloch says about general anesthetic? I mean, that if you're willing to commit to that, then you're going the whole hog. Do you know about this view?
I do, but the viewers might be interested. So go on, tell
It's
us.
terrifying. I mean, you think that when you go for an operation and you have general, it's going to kill the pain or prevent you from being in pain. But Bloch points out that, well, no, people show galvanic skin responses and increased heart rate that suggests pain. But so they show signs of being in pain. They don't remember it afterwards. They don't do anything about it at the time. So maybe what's happening is instead of stopping you feeling the pain, all the general anesthetic does is kill your cognitive access to it. You can't report it, act on it. You
Mm,
can't remember it afterwards, but you feel the whole thing. That's what you're committing yourself to. So I would say in that kind of case, there are signs that pain is present. There are signs that consciousness is lacking because the person can't report or act on
right.
it, doesn't remember it. The best thing to say then is, or the natural thing to say is, there is unconscious pain.
Right. Right. So does he say that about local anesthetic?
No,
What does
local's
he
all
say about
right.
local?
Local kills the pain. So there's this
It's
cool
just the general. Right.
experiment
Right.
with these miners who had local on one side and general, and then when they went up in a plane, the pain from their previous dental work reactivated on the side that they didn't have local on. So he hypothesizes that that's because the local killed the pain, but the general didn't. Scary,
Right.
scary.
It is. It is a
It's really
terrifying.
scary.
No, but I think you're right that the it's very hard to pin this down empirically. Consciousness is not publicly observable. It's very hard to decide which of these is right empirically, which is why it drags on and on and on these discussions. But actually, I think there might be potential for doing it the other way round. Don't know what you think about this, because which way you go on this points you in the direction of one or other theory of consciousness. So at the moment, right, there's no
Mm.
consensus in the science of consciousness. I mean, there's no consensus, at least, on one of the big picture views, of the neural correlates of consciousness. There's global workspace, integrated information theory, higher order thought, and so on. But now maybe our philosophical views on unconscious consciousness or unfelt qualia can help us decide, right? Because if you think unconscious consciousness doesn't make sense, as I'm hearing you saying, Sam, that you can't have a feeling without being cognitively aware of it, then it looks like the prefrontal cortex is going to have to be involved in consciousness, because that's where the more sophisticated cognitive stuff goes on. You're going to go closer to the higher order thought theory of consciousness, where you only have consciousness when you have sort of higher order reflection. Whereas if you're more on mine and Ned Block's side, that no, you can have experiences that you're not cognitively aware of, then maybe you're more open to consciousness just being located in the sensory areas at the back of the brain. And you're gonna not go for the higher order thought theory. You're gonna go for one of the other kind of rival theories, maybe integrated information theory. So maybe actually well, just to finish this point, really, I'm more and more inclined to think that what we need to do is kind of temporarily fragment the field of consciousness. There's absolutely no consensus. We need to do something. We need maybe fragment it into sort of teams of philosophers and scientists, setting up experiments under philosophical interpretations, interpreting the data against these philosophical assumptions, and then just see which bears fruit. Maybe we can come back together at a later date. Yeah, I don't know. So what do you think more generally about what should we do about these philosophical assumptions and the empirical work of the science of consciousness? I mean, this is not even, I'm going on a bit too much, but this is not even the big questions of the hard problem of consciousness. This is just like interpreting the data of where consciousness is located in the brain. And already there's this mess of different philosophical assumptions
Yeah.
that impact how you interpret the data. What the hell do we do with all this?
Good. Great. Great. So a bit of meta philosophy now. I gonna sound gloomy, skeptical, probably, but I'm not. But I don't think this can be settled in the way that you describe. I don't think it can be settled experimentally. I think it's a mistake to carve the philosophy off from the experiments, actually, and say sort of what we've got to do is set up experiments with a philosophical background. So some people go and investigate prefrontal cortex, some people investigate sensory areas, and then we can settle the issue. I don't think the issue is going to be settled that way. The issue is going to be settled philosophically. The reason is philosophy is part of science in the relevant sense. The relevant scientific enterprise is a philosophical one. People say that philosophy's job is just to clear stuff up for science. I really don't think that's true. I do think this is a philosophical question, and scientists, insofar as they're addressing it, are doing philosophy as well. And insofar as we're getting into the empirical stuff, we're doing science, and we should be working together. But it's not something that you're
Yeah,
going to be able to settle
yeah,
in a laboratory, I'm afraid. And to support what I'm
yeah.
saying, I mean, so I am actually a higher order thought theorist. So I do think, you know, I don't want to say consciousness is prefrontal, but prefrontal areas are bound up in the substrate somehow. However, I mean, as far as I understand it, I thought that Block, at least at one time, had a recurrent processing view of consciousness. So on that view, the visual cortex does its work. The visual cortex is a bit like a skyscraper office building with different floors. This floor does edges, this floor does color, shape, orientation. So the percept gets built up as the processing goes up the building, but it doesn't become conscious until there's recurrent backwards processing back to V1, like a kind of loop back. But even on that view, so that's nothing to do with frontal executive areas. You've got a difference between the percept and awareness of it. And you could say the qualia are built up by the forward processing, and the awareness is given by the recurrent
Right, right.
processing. So even on that view, you could have a split view. And I suggest that anyone who thinks like that, and it's a very common way of thinking, that the sensory percept is built, I mean, this is how vision scientists talk, is built up first, and then the awareness comes in as a different mechanism. If they're different mechanisms, surely they can dissociate. So I think that's going to be able to make room
Yep.
for unconscious qualia, and maybe it should do. Maybe it should make room for them.
Mm.
So it's not about, yeah.
Ver-
Anyway, if that makes sense. Yeah, I've
no, very
I've
interesting.
got the
Yeah. No,
feeling you're going to come onto
sorry,
my
go on.
side. I've got the feeling you're drifting ever so slowly. Maybe not until I'm dead in the
It's
future.
possible. It's
Yeah,
possible. I don't know. I find this very difficult. Do you know, actually, just an aside, I find like doing social media stuff, I sometimes occasionally make the mistake of going through YouTube comments if I've been on a sort of big YouTube channel occasionally. And I find like people, because I suppose I am uncertain about a lot of stuff, and I say express uncertainty. Say, "Oh, I'm not sure about this." Some people really don't like that. Some people want a kind of strong man who sort of
yeah.
says, this is the truth. This is what you. And there was one comment on me on YouTube saying, "I'm not going to trust this guy with my ontology. He doesn't know what he thinks." It's just like, but and I really do feel that like certain people I kind of turn off with that who want the strong
Yeah,
man to tell them. Anyway, but no, I think we are in agreement on this that I mean, I think it comes down to just consciousness is not publicly observable. And so there are severe limits and or at least challenges on dealing with it experimentally that don't occur in other areas of science. So, I mean, even if you thought, I think it would be a reasonable position to think in every other area you have the Donetian view that you just philosophy just clears up problems for science to deal with. Maybe I still don't agree with it there, but maybe. But with consciousness, it's this bloody thing that you can't see. It's not publicly observable, but we know about it because we're immediately aware of it. You know, it's and so it is a very different situation. And just in case, just before people I say I always make this qualification. Of course, science deals with things you can't observe, but in the case of consciousness, the unique thing is it's the thing you're trying to explain that can't be observed. In all the other cases, you're theorizing about things you can't observe to explain what you can observe. Um, but anyway, yeah. So, well, we should spend some time on the panpsychism versus
Yeah, we
panqualityism
should.
thing, I
Can I
guess.
just make
So we've talked about yeah, gone.
No, I just wanted to comment on what you just the very interesting things you just said, but I mean, can I?
Sure.
I mean, I totally agree about the being sure
Yeah.
thing. I mean, it's good to be have conviction about a view, apart from feeling nice. You know, we want to sort of think, we want to try and find solutions. I really don't agree with people who think philosophy doesn't find solutions. The problems are hard.
Yeah.
Some of them take a long time. We've only been doing it for a few thousand years. I mean, but that's kind of a joke. But I don't believe that we can't, working with scientists, come to solutions. So we ought to all be aware that we could be wrong and bear that in mind. However, the other thing you said about consciousness being publicly accessible, I guess I don't agree with that.
Ah.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Oh yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
but um,
No, go on.
well,
No,
if
go
it
on.
is
Explain why. That it's a really good point.
well, if it is brain processes, they are public. I mean, there's something you're missing from the outside point of view, but I guess I don't think that it's not publicly observable. It's part of the objective world. It's really
But
important to say that. But sorry, go on.
isn't the quality is not publicly observable, right? I mean, that's so the panqualityist believes in these irreducible qualities, the colors, the sounds, the smells, the taste, the redness of red. um, those are not publicly observable, right? I can't look in your brain and see the qualities you're experiencing, right? I
You,
thought,
well, you couldn't look, but the reason you couldn't look is the reason that Russell gives. Your visual experience is generated in your brain. So if you look at my brain, what you're really strictly seeing is your own brain. You're seeing, you're seeing your visual cortex, or rather, you're aware of your visual cortex. You can't be directly aware of my visual cortex unless we get some wires, like in Inception, right? And wire our cortices up. Also, so I do think intersubjective consciousness is possible in principle, perhaps in practice. If people want to go and Google the Hogan sisters, these amazing Canadian Craniopagus twins who are joined at the thalamus, they seem to have direct awareness of each other's experiences. When one of them tastes, there's this amazing bit in the video, one of them tastes, so they're joined at the head, they're joined at the thalamus, they're two individual people. One of them tastes ketchup, and the other one, she doesn't just say, my sister's tasting ketchup. She's not just aware that she's tasting ketchup. She tries to spit it out. So it's like she has tastes it herself. So our brains are separate. So that's why I can't be aware
right.
of your qualia. But I do think that's possibly a contingent circumstance. Yeah.
Yeah. So right, maybe we will make progress on the science of consciousness when we're able to do something like that. Okay, but we're agreeing too much probably.
Yeah.
Let's come to the great and important battle between panpsychists and panqualityists. In many ways, the defining issue of our time. Okay, so your point is panpsychists like me face this terrible challenge, the combination problem. How do lots of little conscious particles come together to make our consciousness? Okay, I admit that's a big issue, and panpsychists are currently wrestling with it. Maybe we'll get an answer, maybe we won't. But don't you also face pretty much the same problem, right? Okay, you have at the base of reality these unconscious qualia, um, unfelt qualities. How do you put them together to get felt qualities, subjective experience? Where does that? How do you change the water into the wine there? So, isn't this the same? Why is your problem any less problemy?
No, it's definitely a problem. Yeah, no, it's definitely a problem. Jakub Mihailik's got a good paper from a few years ago, Panqualityism and the Awareness Gap, I think it's called, or Panqualityism and the Explanatory Gap, which puts this, pins this down very well. So I think the problem for panpsychism is so the challenge you've just given for panqualityism is a kind of explanatory challenge. How do you explain consciousness? How are you going to get it out of non-conscious resources? Of course, that's a challenge for any non-panpsychist or non-dualist theory. That's a challenge for physicalism as well. The thing about physicalism is it lacks the resources panqualityism has. Physicalism is like I'm gonna paint you the Mona Lisa using a pencil. There are no colours in physicalism. Panqualityism's got a richer palette or richer ontology, so I think it's got more
Right.
chance. But what you're facing isn't just an explanatory challenge. The panpsychist idea that you could make one mind out of a crowd, that's a positive impossibility as far as I can see. So we know that can't work. We don't know you can't get consciousness out of the non-conscious, because that would mean you couldn't explain consciousness at all, and we don't know you can't explain it. So I think panqualityism is a bit better off.
Mm.
It's got a fierce explanatory challenge as opposed to a demonstrable impossibility. I tend to, so this might sound a bit strange, but I tend to think consciousness is kind of invisible. So what I'm aware of right now is you, a bunch of qualia, feelings of my body, my sweaty palms, my hot toes, my hungry belly. And you say, well, aren't you aware of your consciousness as well? Well, I don't quite know what people mean when they say that. I'm aware of a bunch of qualities. If consciousness
Mm.
is not intellectually graspable, because it's like the stage light. It's like it's lighting up the stage, but it's not itself lit up. It's not itself something of which we're aware. Then it's going to be that much harder to explain it. We may hit on the mechanism and not know it because it doesn't knit up in an intellectually satisfying way with the explanandum. So that's my half-baked suspicion as to why consciousness is so hard to explain.
Very cool. So earlier we're talking about, can you have feelings you're not aware of?
Yeah,
And now we're talking about, can you be aware of
yeah,
consciousness itself or subjectivity itself? And it seems like we've swapped roles there. And I was
yeah,
diagnosing why it seems we can't um, have feelings we can't be we're not why we can't have feelings we're not aware of. And now you're sort of diagnosing why we think there's a problem with
yeah.
consciousness in terms of the fact that we can't be aware of
That's
it's all mind
great.
blowing. But yeah, so
That's
yeah,
deep. That's very deep, that
I
is.
think that kind of made sense.
So someone's got to say something's unfelt, either the feelings or the subjectivity. But it seems plausible to me that the subjectivity is not itself like anything. So, I mean, the people who thought perception
Yeah.
was transparent in the 90s, like Gilbert Harman and Ty and people, would say, try and find your perceptual experience. Tell me what it's like. You're only going to report the things you see in the environment, the tree, the desk, the things you see. You're not going to report this awareness at all. So you kind of see straight through it. I feel like we see through consciousness in that way, but yeah, maybe we're going to end up saying something strange
Yeah,
either
that's
way.
something I need. You may, that's something I need to think about more actually. It's something I've thought about, but haven't thought about in this context. So I think I do need my homework is to relate up those two
Mm,
distinct issues. Can you have feelings you're not aware of?
mm,
And can you be aware of your awareness of
mm,
feelings?
mm.
Okay, I'm not going to sleep tonight. I mean, so I suppose I think of your view in a way. I'd be interested to know if you think this is a good way of thinking about it as a sort of middle way between panpsychism and physicalism. I'm normally the middle way guy, but anyway. So if we're dividing between these two aspects of consciousness, the qualities and the subjectivity, the experiencing of the qualities, then in a way you're an anti-physicalist about the qualities You can't explain the qualities in terms of the purely quantitative language of physical science, but you're a physicalist about subjectivity, about how those qualities get to be experienced.
Yeah.
You're a sort of reductionist physicalist story about that. And actually, before you answer, is that a right way to? And here's if that is the way you're thinking about it, here's something in your favor. I mean, if you think of like, I like to trace all this back to Galileo kicking off physical science by taking consciousness out. That's how I normally say it. But actually, what did he take out? The qualities. It was the qualities that bothered him because he wanted purely mathematical description of the physical world. If you want a purely quantitative description, you have to take the qualities out. It wasn't necessarily about subjectivity. Another point in your favor, if one is motivated by the knowledge argument, maybe we haven't got time to go into that, but lots of people will know about that. Black and White Mary. That seems to be all about the qualities. So you could say, yeah, that's the problem with physicalism. And okay, so I'm selling your view. Actually, I'm persuading myself of your
Thanks.
view. So yeah, but is that the right way for you putting in? And again, can you help me with? I mean, me as a panpsychist, I'm worried about both. Both seem to me unbridgeable. I
Yeah.
don't know how you get qualities out of quantities, but also once you've got the qualities, I don't know how you get them experienced. So
Yeah.
I sort of feel like we both gaps can't be
Yeah.
bridged.
Yeah.
Can you help me say a bit more to persuade me that the second gap can be
Yeah.
bridged?
Yeah. No, good. No, I don't know if it can, but I mean, you're dead right. I think it's a good description to say I'm an anti-physicalist about qualities and a physicalist about awareness, at least insofar as that's not very confusing. But yeah, that's right. We're reductionist about the latter and not the former. I mean, when Mary in the black and white room she's wondering what red is like. What's it like to see red? She's not wondering what's it like to be conscious, because she's already conscious. Insofar as there's something it's like to be aware or to feel, she knows that already. The puzzle for her is what's redness like, and that's a question about qualities. That seems to me the real
Right.
challenge for physicalism. I mean, okay, awareness. Yeah, I mean, I also think, like, when you conceive of a zombie, people, you see zombies described. Imagine a duplicate of you that lacks qualia. It says, or something like that. And what you do is you imagine it without all the qualities going on. Can you once you've done that, once you've removed the visual qualities, the tactile qualities, the emotional, sensory, possibly cognitive qualities, can you then perform a further act and remove its experience or its awareness? I mean, it seems to be not something you can. I don't know. I just don't get hold of anything when I try and do that. It seems to me awareness itself is really intangible. In fact, this is going to sound nuts, but I think it's a posit. I don't think we are aware of it. I mean, Uriah Kriegel argued in his 2009 book that unless we are aware of consciousness itself, for all we know, we might be zombies. So we have to experience consciousness
Mm.
itself. Russell thought we did. Galen Strawson thinks we do. A lot of people think we do. Um, but I tend to think it's a posit. What we're aware of is qualities. Qualities are there. So then there must be something that makes the difference between what we're aware of and what we're not. What's there for me? What's there for you? That is what we call consciousness. So I'm not sure that we can get a good explanatory purchase on it because of that. We may only be able to come up with correlations. They may not feel intellectually satisfying. So yeah, I don't have more.
That's really interesting. So I suppose if we're not aware of consciousness, then it can't be a problem, can it? It can't be something you're not aware of. It's like, I don't know how to explain flippity gibbets. And you say, what's flippity gibbets? And you say, like, it's, I don't know. I don't know. It's this, I don't know what it is. So, but if you don't know what it is, you can't know it's not physically explicable. You know what the hell it is. So I suppose if you're not aware of consciousness at all, then it can't be a mystery. Is that
Well,
part of what you're
it
thinking? Or
is
am I
no, it is a
misunderstanding your point?
mystery, but you could say all we know is its job description. We know what it does. We know its profile. It makes qualities aware, sort of like something for us. So there's something in your head that does that for the qualia in your head, or the qualia you're aware of, and something else in my head that does it for mine. And that means that I'm not, as it stands, aware of yours, and you're not aware of mine. Everyone has their own little bubble of consciousness. So there's some kind of mechanism. What it's like intrinsically, we don't have a clue, it seems to me.
I see. I
Maybe.
see.
So that sounds really strange, but someone might take that as a reductio of my view, I guess. But um, I, I recur to the people who say that perception is transparent. Like they're onto something. I do think I'm aware of qualia, so I don't think perception is transparent in that way. But the consciousness part of it is rather hard to get a grasp on, except in respect of this job description. So maybe the best we can do is find what it is that correlates with your reports, that you're conscious. But of course, then we're into
Hmm.
all the problems Ned Block's highlighted for that research paradigm. Yeah, which is why it's going to be philosophy that solves. I recently read a bunch of people in AI science saying, now we've got AI. Philosophy's handed the problem of consciousness over to science, and now it's a grown-up real problem. It's graduated to a real problem. Science will sort it out, and I think that's exactly backwards. Philosophy will sort it out. Of course, philosophy needs to be scientifically engaged, but the empirical stuff itself is not going to resolve the issue. I really think
Well, I'm on board here. I mean, I think we're going through a phase of history where people are understandably so blown away by the success of science and the incredible technology it's produced that they think that's everything. This is it. It works. Come on, let's. And everything else just feels sort of intangible. And I mean, you can understand that, can't you? If like as a very experimental scientist who's has to raise money to build a particle collider and it takes ages, and then these philosophers sitting in their armchairs going, oh, it just feels like. So I mean, I think there's just something going on. It's a phase we need to get through, and we need to get back to some point. But the whole thing bloody kicked off by Galileo proposing a new philosophy that takes consciousness out. It's been bloody amazing, but it's been bloody amazing because Galileo gave us a limited focus with his radical philosophical position that wasn't experimentally supported. He just said, this is what I think, and everyone believed him. Um, yeah, someday, don't worry, comrades, someday we will get back to everyone accepting once again that philosophy is and has to be the mother of the sciences. But there's one more important problem that we haven't discussed, which is that you and I, Sam, are old buddies, and we need to have a social catch up off camera before I have to feed children and you have to mark some essays or grade some essays, as our American comrades say. But you've given me lots to think about. I'm gonna hand over to you if you want to say anything else before we stop the camera.
Yeah, thanks, Philip. It's been great. One comment about the armchair. So I've sat in talks by philosophers of science or scientists who know some philosophy, and they have a go at the armchair, but they make it very clear that they're in their own armchair, the anti-armchair armchair, and there's under no circumstances will they acknowledge that there's any role for philosophy or a priori stuff, and they can't possibly be dislodged from that. They're in their own armchair. And when we say we're not talking
Yeah.
about the armchair, we're talking about thinking. And there's nobody who's going to tell you that thinking about experimental results, doing a review paper where you look at a bunch of studies and say what do they mean, thinking about that in a more abstract way, not just going into the lab and poking stuff and looking at the results. No one's going to seriously tell you that that is not relevant. That's part of science, thinking about the results, making sense of them. That's all philosophy
Yeah.
really is in this context. So philosophy has a role. We need to work together. We can't do the experiments, but at the same time, the scientists may not have the time or the training to, be aware of all the conceptual possibilities. Obviously need a fusion of the two. So, and before Galileo's a good example, but Aristotle did science and did philosophy together. Those things go hand in hand because we're investigating the world at the end of the day. So yeah, we could both go on a rant now, but anyway, there's my 2 pence.
And when you try to do out philosophy, we just end up with bad philosophy, don't we? We end up with people doing philosophy and
Yeah,
not
no,
realizing it. Even if, as you say, even if you're arguing that you can't find out anything in an armchair, that is itself a view you come up with in an armchair. There's no like experiment. Oh, we've proven with this experiment that you can't find out anything in an armchair. I don't know.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
But yeah,
Philosophy's
yeah, we should
inevitable.
have someone here to disagree with.
It's inevitable. It's going to be done.
Yeah.
If it's not
Now,
philosophers that do it, it'll be scientists. They're doing philosophy naturally. Can we help with that? Yes.
now I'm wondering actually, which is a more clickbaity title for this talk? Why science will never get us the answers. No, that's not what we're saying, is it? But yeah, well, actually, what do you before we finish? Actually, do you want to tell viewers or listeners where they can access your things?
Well, I mean, I've got a homepage on academia.edu. I'm at University of Hertfordshire currently, but I'm moving to back University of London from January, so you better find me there. I don't know. Send me an email. Send me an email. Do you want me to? Well, I shouldn't maybe release my email online, but you can Google me and send me an email. That'd be nice. I don't know.
Oh, that's nice. Very welcoming.
Yeah, I like to chat to people. It's fun. Some people, I get emails from crazy people like, "I'm a panqualityist," and I'm like, "Great." Another another nutter, another crazy.
I get a lot of emails. I used to reply to all of them, but
No, it's too
it's
many.
just not possible anymore. Anyway, Sam, this has been honestly a very thought-provoking discussion. I think people are going to be fascinated with this. I'm really glad that we can get people thinking more about panqualityism and this issue of unfelt qualia or unconscious consciousness or whatever, and that we've completely conclusively established that you need philosophy.
Well, we would say that, wouldn't we?
So I'm glad we've sorted it all out. Sam, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Philip. Thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure.